Okay. It's fall 2015, and I'm holding office hours in my fourth floor office in Encina Hall. Out the window on this fall afternoon, I can see across all of Stanford University up to the dish and then just beyond to the sun beginning to set behind the mountains. It's one of those glorious Stanford afternoons, and it brings to mind the fact that I've heard Stanford students refer to the architectural style of Stanford as Neo-Taco Bell. And I love them for this. I've been teaching political philosophy at Stanford for about 15 years. And when I first joined the university in the early 2000s, the most popular majors on campus were history and economics and psychology. But the campus had been changing since the time I had arrived, and by 2015, the most popular major was computer science, which it remains still to this day. I had watched the students begin to vote with their feet, emptying out the main part of campus where I taught and going over to the engineering quad in order to get all these newfangled technical skills that were so in vogue. Of course, the digital revolution here in Silicon Valley had transformed the world, and Stanford was the white-hot center of it all. Now, I was a little worried about not having as many people interested in philosophy and political science as had used to be true, but I sort of understood the basic story. I was annoyed, however, by the fact that it seemed that there had been constructed at Stanford a kind of conveyor belt in which students showed up already at Stanford in their earliest days, ready to hop on the computer science bandwagon, work really hard, and then get deposited kind of unthinkingly at the end of it all at a startup company or a big tech company. I remember I went over to the computer science department and hung out with the engineers for a little while, and I left the Gates Computer Science building one afternoon, and there were a whole bunch of tables set up on the outside. A bunch of companies had sent young recruiters to campus, and they were passing out bucket hats and boba tea to passing students in return for a resume, and that would get them an interview. And so the pipeline worked. I remember thinking, didn't see any bucket hats or boba teas outside the philosophy department. You know, it sort of bothered me that this conveyor belt existed. In the best of circumstances, it bothered me that students were sort of unthinkingly just joining the bandwagon, sort of pulled along by the force of gravity and then deposited at the end of their studies into a nice tech job. In the worst of all cases, it seemed to me that Stanford was sort of on the verge of becoming a newfangled vocational school, this time with a bunch of technical skills that, really didn't deserve the title of a liberal arts university. It brought to mind that line from Steve Jobs that I kept hearing at the time, "Don't you want to put a dent in the universe?" And I remember thinking, can we stop putting dents in the universe? So it's fall 2015, office hours. I'm teaching a class for first-year students, and on this fall afternoon, a student comes into my office, bushy-eyed, very eager. I do my best to put him at ease and say, well, welcome to campus. It's so great that you're here. Thanks for taking this class that I'm teaching about justice. What are you thinking of majoring in? And he looks at me and he says, oh, professor, I am so excited to be at Stanford. I am 100% for sure a computer science major. I can't wait to take the classes on AI. I'm so pumped to meet the venture capitalists who come down here to campus. This place is amazing. And I say, that's great, but you've just shown up. You should really try to take some other classes, other things that you might be interested in. No, you don't understand, professor. I mean, I had startup ideas when I was in high school. I have startup ideas now. I want to be a founder. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to change the world through technology. Now, I say, sort of a little dispirited, all right, I'll play along. Why don't you tell me about your startup ideas? And this kid looks me dead in the eye, and with total sincerity, he says, I'd be happy to tell you about them, professor, but first, I'd have to ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I was not merely irritated. I was offended. So first of all, Since when did the 18-year-olds arrive on campus already so socialized into what it meant to be a Stanford student that they were asking me, a philosophy professor, to sign an NDA? Second of all, what did he think that I was going to do with his pathetic ideas? I mean, was I going to tell them to another student, use them on my own? I mean, I'm a professor. I direct the Ethics Center. Anyway, that night I go home and I decide something needs to change. There needs to be a cultural intervention on this campus to try to change this conveyor belt orientation. Some type of broadening is necessary. So I go home and I'm trying to think about what I might do. And I remind myself, I'm a philosophy professor, and when I teach philosophy to students, including this kid who came to my office, I tell them, when you make arguments and you have criticisms, you can't just make the arguments and make the criticisms. You have to offer the best possible counter-argument. You have to be the maximally charitable interpreter of your opponent's ideas. So I reflect to myself, how can I make the most sense of this kid and what's happening at Stanford? And that brings me back then to think about when I was graduating college a couple generations earlier. And when I graduated college in the early 1990s, I remember talking to all of my friends senior year and discovering, kind of to my surprise, that more than half of them were applying to just one of two kinds of jobs. They were applying to go work at a management consulting firm or to go work on Wall Street. And that wasn't too surprising. It was high status, you made a bunch of money, but it did occur to me, I never remember anybody freshman year saying, I am so pumped to be here because I can't wait to get a job at McKinsey. What magic alchemy happened between first year and senior year that more than half of the students applied for jobs in those places? And so there was this criticism of my generation of college students. Remember, this was the years right after 1989, the end of the Cold War, before 9/11, the sort of peaceful years with democracy on the rise. And the criticism was that we were a kind of sad, conformist bunch of students. We were perky conformists. We were lovably dull. We were really good at jumping through hoops. We were good at coloring in the lines. We were really excellent sheep. And this one criticism I heard from the Dean of Religious Life really cut to me. He said, your generation, I'm worried about you. You guys are gentle cowards who think that your gentleness excuses your cowardice. And as I remembered this about my generation, I thought to myself, I have a kind of different story to tell about the computer science students here at Stanford. No one went off to McKinsey or to Goldman Sachs and thought that they were going to make the world a better place. They just thought it was a good payday, socially high status, a nice thing to do. But the computer science students, they think they're going to make a bunch of money and make the world a better place. And they actually have a pretty decent story to tell. I mean, as a management consultant, you can't work as a 23-year-old and then suddenly have your spreadsheet, go out to the world and affect millions of people. But it was a Stanford undergraduate who created Instagram, and 18 months later, it had 1 billion users, a piece of software, and sold the company for $1 billion. It's possible to code away in your pajamas over the weekend and release your code as an app on Monday, and maybe thousands, possibly millions, maybe even 1 billion people use it. You really can change the world as a software engineer, as a coder, and that, I thought, partly explained what the Stanford students were doing. So, my cultural intervention. I thought to myself, maybe I'll teach a course on the ethics of technology. But if I teach my class from the philosophy department or political science department, I kind of understand already how the students are going to respond to me. It's the usual philosopher wagging his finger from the sideline saying, please slow down, use a stop sign, maybe think first before you build something. And I could sort of tell how that would go. So I decided instead to go join with people in the engineering quad. And I made a partnership with the most popular professor on campus, a guy named Mehran Sahami, who still remains one of the most popular professors here, teaches the Introduction to Computer Science class, and with Jeremy Weinstein, a public policy and social science expert who had just come out of the Obama administration and served at the highest levels of the US government. And we designed a course that integrated ethics, public policy, and technical skills all in the same class. And the goal was to try to create something that forced technical students to take on board philosophy and public policy, and forced public policy students to learn some technical skills, and forced philosophers, the few of them that I encountered on campus, in order to come down and experience this great energy of building things through software. I was pretty excited because when we launched the class, we thought maybe we'd get 100 people, but year one, we had 300. And then people in Silicon Valley heard about the class and came to visit it sometimes. And people wanted us to come bring the class into Silicon Valley companies. We ended up writing a book together called System Error. And this intervention was beginning to snowball a little bit. I thought maybe I wasn't going to change the conveyor belt, but I was going to broaden the kinds of experiences that students had on it, so that it wasn't just these technical skills you were getting. But unexpectedly, I found that the experience was also transforming me. Maron, the computer scientist, would say to me, "Rob, you're really good with the kind of provocative questions, but I mean, don't you really want to get inside a company and build something?" And then Jeremy, the social scientist, would tell me, "Yeah, the kind of irritation that you bring to the classroom is all well and good, but don't you want to see how the policy sausage gets made?" And so I thought, maybe I would like to try to go out and do something else outside of the campus, outside of my comfortable lane as a philosopher. And as you heard in my introduction, I joined the United States AI Safety Institute in Washington, D.C. for the past year. And I got a chance to work in the highest levels of government on steering this extraordinary new technology towards social benefit. I just left the job and I'm back on campus now for the first time. And being here reminded me of that kid who visited me during office hours. And I wonder now, 10 years later, is he an AI overlord? Is he a venture capitalist now crawling around campus looking for the next big thing? Would he have ever predicted that I would have gone into the US government at the US AI Safety Institute? The lesson that I took away from working in government is that 100% for sure AI is going to transform so much of our world. It already has begun to. But if we leave that job of transformation to the technologists alone, we'll be much worse off. We need to do it with all of the skills of a liberal arts university and all of the voices of people who are users as well as the designers of the technology. Thank you very much.